What would Martin Luther King say if he walked in silence through the shadows of the room where Breonna Taylor fell? He wouldn't scream. He wouldn't break anything, but you'd see it in his eyes. That same look that cut through crowds without saying a word. The pain of someone who's seen too much. The pain of someone who fought for a promise that's still broken every day. And he would speak. He'd look at you, yes, you. No beating around the bush, no frills, and he'd ask, how long? How long will you accept that justice has a color filter? How long will black skin be a target before it's a human being? How long will this country, which calls itself free, keep pulling the trigger against those who didn't even have time to dream? Martin Luther King wouldn't talk about statistics. He already knew the numbers, and he knew they lie when they try to hide the smell of blood behind graphs and tables. What matters isn't how many die. It's the fact that we're still dying. What matters is the coldness with which death is normalized when the skin is dark, and the silence that spreads when the body falls. Breonna isn't a symbol. She was a person. She had a face, she had a name. She was tired from the end of her shift. She laughed on Sundays. She had too many plans to fit in a coffin. And yet she was treated like a threat, asleep. In a country that prides itself on freedom, a black woman didn't even have the right to wake up. Martin Luther King would see all this and remember what he always said. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But today injustice isn't just anywhere. It has an address, it knocks with a boot, it enters without permission, and it shoots without thinking twice. And you can even try to argue, say it was a mistake, that the police were doing their job, that there was a warrant, but tell the truth. If Breonna was white, blonde, the daughter of a judge, would she have been shot 8 times inside her own home without even knowing what was happening? Martin Luther King would look at you firmly and ask that, not to accuse you, but to make you feel, to pull you out of the comfort of indifference, because those who live numbed by routine don't see the absurdity in the repetition of tragedy. And that's what racism does. It hides in normalcy. It becomes protocol, it becomes procedure, it becomes background noise while you eat dinner. And the black body keeps falling. The problem isn't the error, the problem is the pattern. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Alton Sterling. The list grows as if each name were just another number. But for those who loved them, each one was an entire world. Martin Luther King felt that. He knew loss, he knew the bitter taste of collective mourning. And he knew that violence against black people has never been just physical. It's psychological, it's spiritual, it's ancestral. Do you know what it's like to live knowing that your body is seen as a threat? Do you know what it's like to be trained from an early age not to seem dangerous, even when you're scared? Have you ever felt the weight of going out on the street and thinking twice before putting on your hood, before running, before raising your voice? Martin Luther King knew. That's why he never just talked about laws or reforms. He talked about dignity. He talked about humanity. And that's what's still missing. Because police violence against black people isn't just abuse. It's the denial of our existence as complete, as worthy, as alive. What you saw in the scene of that room wasn't just a death. It was the reflection of a structure that still operates on the logic of domination, where the black body needs to justify its presence, where the black voice is silenced before it finishes the sentence, where black dreams are interrupted before they blossom. Martin Luther King would walk among these ruins and recognize every crack, because they were the same ones he tried to seal with words, with marches, with prayer. But he would also know that words aren't enough if they aren't followed by action. And action isn't fiery speech. Action is confrontation. Action is looking at the system and saying no more. You can't keep accepting this world as it is. You can't keep repeating the script, tragedy, headline, protest, forgetting. You can't keep settling for promises that don't leave the paper. The blood has already dried, but the wound is open. Martin Luther King would call you to responsibility. And it doesn't matter if you're black, white, poor, or rich, because he believed that injustice only dies when everyone refuses to be complicit. He would remind you that the oppressor isn't the only one to blame. The silence of the righteous also kills. Are you ready to break that silence? He would look at you seriously and say that loving your neighbor isn't a feeling, it's a choice. That fighting for Breonna's life isn't a banner, it's a commitment to the truth. And that justice isn't a favor, it's a right. If it doesn't reach everyone, then it isn't justice. Martin Luther King knew the road would be long. He knew there would be setbacks. But he never imagined that so many years later, the scene of a black body falling at home from state bullets would still seem so common. And maybe he would ask himself, at what point in history did we stop being outraged? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Because while she slept, the door was broken down, and the world once again was silent for too long. How long? Martin Luther King would walk among the protests, hear the cries of "Say her name," and know that the echo of the struggle still lives. But he would ask you, are you just repeating the chorus, or are you willing to carry the weight of the cause? Because loving justice is easy. It's hard to sustain it when it demands discomfort from you. It's hard to give up privileges, comfort, emotional distance. It's hard to feel the other person's pain as if it were your own. But that's where the real change begins. Breonna Taylor didn't have to die, just like so many others. But as long as this reality is possible, none of us are safe. Martin Luther King didn't want revenge, he wanted truth. And truth demands confrontation. Truth demands courage. Truth demands you. Will you choose to see? Because it's not enough to lament. It's not enough to post. It's not enough to revolt for a few days. Martin Luther King fought for conscience to be greater than commotion. And he still expects you to stand up, to speak, to feel, to never again accept this world as it is. Because as long as there is silence, the dream will continue to be just that, a dream. But if you decide truly to be part of the change, then maybe, just maybe, the next Breonna will have a chance to wake up. What would Martin Luther King say if you were still standing there waiting for the world to change on its own? He wouldn't judge you, no. He was never about that. But he would ask you with his eyes, that look that crosses time, what exactly are you waiting for? For a new name to be splashed across the headlines? For another body stretched out on the floor to provoke another cycle of fleeting outrage? For the pain of others to hit so deep that it finally makes you move? Because look, it's not just about Breonna anymore. It's about the echo she left on the floor of that room. It's about the emptiness that remained in place of what she dreamed of being. It's about how many other lives are in line, waiting, as if living were a privilege granted by luck and not a right to exist. Martin Luther King would say with that calm and firm voice that carried earthquakes inside, that omission is also a decision. That you may not pull the trigger, but you close your eyes while the trigger is pulled, and that has weight. It has consequence. It has complicity. He would tell you, without raising his tone, that this structure isn't invisible. It's just ignored by those who can. That the bricks of racism were cemented with centuries of convenience, cowardice, and silence. And that even if you didn't build that wall, now it's in front of you. And you have a choice. Either you help tear it down or you learn to live with the sound of sirens that don't stop ringing. Martin Luther King would say that the most dangerous thing isn't the declared racist. It's the indifferent one. It's the one who says they're against racism, but doesn't move. The one who thinks it's regrettable but doesn't risk their own comfort. He would tell you that the easiest path has always been that of omission, and that's why he never walked that path. Are you too comfortable? Because you don't change the world on top of the wall. You don't build justice with neutrality. You don't face centuries of oppression with passivity. Martin Luther King knew that being loved by everyone was impossible when you chose the truth. He paid with his own life, and yet he went to the end with open hands and his head held high, because he knew that the cost of cowardice is always greater than the price of courage. And this is where the conversation changes, because it's not enough to understand, it's not enough to agree. The world doesn't need more understanding without action. It needs courage. And it's not just the courage to go to the streets. It's the courage to look in the mirror and recognize what you have done or failed to do. It's the courage to confront your circles, to educate yours, to be present, not only when it's easy, but especially when it's uncomfortable. Martin Luther King would say that it's no use saying "I'm not racist" if you are silent when racism shows its teeth. Because silence, my friend, is always on the side of the oppressor. It always has been. And maybe you say you don't know where to start. Maybe you say it's too big, too complex. But he would remind you that the first step is never the hardest. The hardest thing is deciding not to take any. He would look at you with that look of someone who has seen the impossible become possible, and he would tell you that the fight doesn't start with shouts. It starts with posture, with presence, with the firm refusal to accept the unacceptable. He would walk through the streets where the protests broke out. He would hear the names that were shouted. He would see the faces marked by pain, by revolt, by hope, and he would say that the dream still lives there. It still throbs, even if hurt, even if tired, because the flame he lit never went out. It just needs air, and you are that air, you are that spark, you are that chance. But make no mistake, racism isn't dismantled just with pretty words. It doesn't undo itself with intention. It feeds on custom, on structure, on laws that don't protect, on approaches that kill, on judgments that condemn before the court. And you, within this system, also carry power. The power to change narratives, to build spaces, to not collude, to not perpetuate. Martin Luther King would talk about Breonna as he would talk about his own daughter, because for him there was no difference. Every black daughter for him was an extension of his own. Every black son was his brother. Every murdered black woman was his soul sister. He would understand the fear, but he wouldn't accept the paralysis. He would say that the greatest tragedy isn't the violence of evil, but the omission of good. And he would ask you, with all the strength of his faith, that you not conform to the world as it is, because history was shaped by those who refused to accept the normality of oppression. Do you refuse? Because as long as there is racism, there is no peace. There is control. There is forced silence. There is the appearance of order. But true peace only comes from justice. And justice demands confrontation. Martin Luther King wouldn't tell you to wait. He's seen what waiting costs. He's seen time be an excuse to postpone equity. He's seen speeches of progress serve as anesthesia. He would say, "The moment is now. And if you think that what you can do is little," he would remind you that a body lying on the floor can start a revolution, that a sentence said at the right time can become a collective cry, that the heart of someone who feels is more potent than any repression machine. But for that, you need to feel. You need to stop looking away. You need to understand that each Breonna, each George, each soul torn away by force is also a crack in your own freedom. Martin Luther King would call you to the center, to the front line, not necessarily in the streets, but where you are, at your work, in your home, in your conversations, in your choice to inform yourself, to position yourself, to ally yourself, because racism is a gear, and if you don't stop that machine, it keeps going, grinding dreams, grinding lives, grinding futures. And this is where he would be silent, so that you could hear the sounds that have always been muffled. The crying of mothers, the cries for help, the creaking of broken doors, the shots that cut through the night, the hurried steps of those who run not for sport, but for survival. Can you hear? Because Martin Luther King heard all this, even in the silence, and yet he chose to believe. And yet he chose to love. And yet he chose to fight with words, with presence, with faith, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. And now you are the one here, facing the same system, facing the same pains, facing the same choice. Are you going to keep waiting, or are you going to carry that flame forward as he did? Because the world needs it, and it needs it now. And Martin Luther King, if he were by your side, would say that the dream isn't over. But it doesn't survive alone. It needs people who see, people who feel, people who act. Are you going to be that person, or are you going to wait for the next body to wake you up? The question is asked, and time has already started counting. Do you feel the weight of this, or do you just hear and go back to life as if you hadn't heard anything? How many times have you glossed over a news item like this? How many times have you read a name like Breonna, George, Juan Pedro, and thought it was just another case, another name, another body that time erases and the world swallows? How many times have you pretended you didn't see the video? The truth is that if this still bothers you, you are alive. But if this doesn't move you, then you're just breathing. And Martin Luther King, if he could talk to you now, at the exact moment you hear me, he wouldn't offer you comfort, he would demand your presence. He didn't die for you to think the speech was beautiful. He died so that you would understand that justice doesn't happen by chance, and that the omission of those who can speak is as cruel as the violence of those who shoot. Racism doesn't survive only on explicit hatred. It survives on custom, on absence, on cowardice camouflaged as neutrality. And that's where you come in. There's no way to get out of this clean. You choose either to carry the structure or to break with it. Have you ever asked yourself what you are actually doing? Have you ever asked yourself what you are failing to do? Have you ever looked deep into your own inertia and had the courage to call it by name? Because it's no longer possible to continue as if racism were a distant issue. It's too close. It's in the way they look. It's in the hand that pulls the trigger. It's in the approach that starts with a question and ends with a shot. It's in the look that distrusts even before hearing. It's in the jobs that never come, in the smiles that aren't returned, in the space that's never offered. It's in the black body that needs to explain itself constantly, justify its existence, mold itself to survive in a world that rejects it in silence every single day. And you? Do you stay silent, or do you commit? The turning point lies in that choice. It's in that exact moment between your doubt and your decision that the size of your humanity is measured. Because no one is asking you to save the world, but you can stop pretending it's not crumbling. You can decide to no longer be part of the mass that normalizes. You can choose to see. And once you see, you can't unsee. If you feel, if you think, if you know, then you need to act. And acting isn't always being on the front lines. Sometimes it's starting from within. It's re-evaluating what you thought you knew. It's listening to those who feel it in their skin. It's talking to those you never wanted to confront. It's no longer hiding behind, "I don't have the right to speak," when what you really lack is the will to listen. You can't keep saying you're against racism and continue living as if it were just someone else's wound. It's not. It's in the air we breathe, and whoever doesn't fight it propagates it. You need to choose which side you're on. You need to stop expecting others to carry the weight that is also yours. Martin Luther King didn't ask to be a martyr. He wanted to live. He wanted to raise his children. He wanted to see the day when justice wasn't the exception. But his dream was interrupted because it was too inconvenient, because he said what no one wanted to hear, because he looked you in the eye and told the truth. And that truth still lives. It pulses in the names you try to forget, in the faces that fade too quickly, in the voices that scream but are muffled by the rush of everyday life. Will you be just another one who hears and forgets? Or will you finally stop and do something with what you feel? This choice isn't comfortable, but it's yours, and it's not made just once. It's renewed every day. And the only thing Martin Luther King would say now, looking directly into your eyes, without raising his voice, is this: "It's no use saying you believe in the dream if you're not willing to live the nightmare with us. So choose. Choose not for me, not for him. Choose for yourself. Choose for those who haven't even been born yet, but already carry on their skin the risk of not reaching 25. Choose for those who haven't had time to dream. Choose and commit to it. Because the world doesn't change with good intentions. It changes when someone, even afraid, decides not to accept it anymore."